good afternoon, everyone, and good morning also to the ones joining us from the Americas. I'm glad to welcome you to this webinar on designing effective public warning emergency messages. I'll be your host today. To those who don't know me, I'm Benoît Vivier, and this webinar is hosted by the European Emergency Number Association. I'm happy to see a very diverse audience joining today's webinar, and I believe not everyone is familiar with my organization, ENA. So in one line, we're dedicated to improving emergency communications across Europe and also beyond. And public warning is a big part of that. And we basically want to act as a discussion platform between professionals and basically serve as a bridge between different sectors, different organizations, different countries, and even different parts of the world. So feel free to have a look at our knowledge hub on our website. Just go to ina.org, and you can have access in open access actually to documents, webinars, news, blog posts, etc. And then you can also become members of INA also to stay tuned with our activities. The webinar today is a part of our efforts. We are now a bit more than 50 people. There were 95 people registered, so I guess more people will be joining as I speak. And if I look at the details, we had registrations from public authorities from 24 different countries. And adding to that, international organizations, NGOs, universities, consultancies, solution providers, etc. So that just shows us that's like the impact that we can, a discussion platform like that can have to basically share knowledge together. So hopefully we'll have some nice discussions today. So now more and more countries have advanced solutions for alerting the population, such as cell broadcast. Now it's available in most of our countries represented here in the call today. However, having a technology is one thing, but a bigger part of it is having a strategy on how to use this technology. And that includes working on the contents of the alerts, what message, what information should be in the message, with what instructions, with what words you should use. And so that's many questions. To address these points today, I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Jeanette Sutton. Welcome, Jeanette. And I know it's quite early for you, so I'm very glad you could join us at such an early time for you. So Jeanette has a PhD in sociology from the University of Colorado in Boulder and has specialized in disaster and risk communication with a focus on public alerts and warnings. Her work involves designing and testing messages across various hazard types. She recently led the development of a design dashboard for FEMA, the US Federal Emergency Management Agency, creating workflows and lexicons for 48 hazard types. So Jeanette is going to present that work today, having in mind that most of the audience today is based outside of the US. So we'll hear, of course, mostly how this work can also apply in other countries. Just a few words before we begin, a few housekeeping points. First of all, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on our website shortly after the session. In general, all our webinars are on open access. Just go to ina.org/webinars, and you can watch and listen to all the webinars we've done. And as we're using Zoom, you may have noticed that we have automatically translated captions available. If you're not very confident with English, you can just click on the button that you see that is presented on the screen, and there will be automatic translation to your desired language. Now, before we begin with the main content, we'd like to invite you to participate in a very brief interactive activity using a platform called Slido. So that's to understand a bit who is in the audience today and where we're from, just so that we have a better figure than just a number. So this will allow us to get to know our audience and also for you to see who's also there. So you should see now on the screen a QR code and a link on your screen. So just use your smartphone camera, scan that QR code, and you will see some questions. I will do the same as well as I speak. So the first question is, where are you joining us from today? And we see people joining from the US many. Thank you for calling for coming. It's quite early for you. But then many people from Europe as well. I see Germany, France, big crowd from the Baltics, Latvia and Lithuania. We have Estonia as well, so, Netherlands, Belgium, Switzerland, Iceland, Luxembourg, Greece, the Dominican Republic as well, Portugal. Yeah, now it's it's moving a bit, but yeah, many countries represented from different parts of the world, which is great. All right, then I still see one participant typing hello, Bulgaria as well, and Slovakia just joining. Czech Republic, Brazil. Very nice. So very diverse crowd, which is great. Just one more question is which sector you represent? Do you work for an emergency service or a public authority? Is it a university, a private company, non-governmental organization, or something else? All right, I see, yeah, good majority, 62% of emergency services / public authorities. So just so that we know who we are and who is Jeanette going to speak to today. So yeah, you'll see people more or less answering, but the results stay fairly similar around 60%. We will also be using Slido, so stay connected on Slido to collect your questions throughout the webinars. So if you have some question, you still see on Slido a Q&A box. So you can type your question there. You can also upvote some questions that is submitted by others if you feel it's very relevant. And after the presentations by Jeanette, we'll have a Q&A session where we will go through the questions that have been asked on Slido. Enough for me. Now all for you, Jeanette. The floor is yours. Jeanette, if you're speaking, I'm afraid we cannot hear you. Maybe you're muted.
I am trying to get my camera and my sound turned on.
Now the sound works.
Great.
But we can't see you.
Hold on just a second. There we go. I just have to go backwards. Hi.
Hi, Jeanette.
Hi, good morning.
Now we can see you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And we can see the
Thank
presentation.
you for that really great introduction. And it's so nice to see how many people are represented from around the world this morning. In the United States where I am, it's just about 8:30 a.m. and it's a beautiful day in upstate New York, which is halfway between New York City and Canada. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about the tools that we've been developing in the United States for wireless emergency alerts and other alerting channels. And I've asked one of my colleagues to provide some definitions for acronyms that I might be using after I introduce the acronym. So he'll be putting them in the chat. If you have questions about things that I say that maybe you heard and you're not quite sure you understood the acronym, please just put that question in there. And my good friend and colleague, Eddie Bertola, can pop in and try and answer those questions. So thank you, Benoit, for inviting me. We met at a French Alert Symposium that was held in Avignon, France this past spring, where I had this really wonderful opportunity to get to know some of your colleagues from academia and practice at that event. And that was hosted by Johnny Dubonnet at Avignon. So I want to start by talking about how we understand effective warning messages. As an academic and trained as a sociologist, I always begin from a research background. And this model I'm sharing with you was first identified by Dr. Dennis Maletti and Dr. John Sorensen. And this represents what we understand as the socio-behavioral response to warning messages. That, of course, first people have to receive the message through one of the many channels that's available to them: text messaging, broadcast messaging, social media, and for the United States, wireless emergency alerts, which is our broadcast channel that sends messages from the Federal Emergency Management Agency through the integrated public alert and warning system to people's individual cell phones. Those messages are designed by alerting authorities at the local and state levels, and then it passes through the IPAWS system. So messages are received on a person's cell phone. And one of the most difficult things that we have to do as emergency managers and public communicators is to help people to recognize that they are at risk so that they will take action. And this means that we have to write really, really good messages in order to help people to understand what the threat is, what it could do, and what people need to do to take care of themselves, leading to a behavioral response. So in the academic setting, in order to measure whether or not a message is effective, we test messages using experiments and conducting surveys and doing interviews and focus groups with people. And what Maletti and Sorensen recognized was that people go through a series of perceptions in order to shift from this idea of being safe to this feeling of being at risk. And so those perceptions include things like understanding the message, understanding the threat, understanding who the message is from, understanding what they must do to protect themselves. They must also believe that the message is real and that the threat is real. So understanding that and believing are both motivating factors of a behavioral response. Personalization of that information is very important in order to recognize that they are personally at risk. They have to see themselves in the message, which means including information about the location of the threat and the location of the impact of that threat. And then they have to determine whether or not they can make a decision about what to do in response to that threat as part of this overall process. And the decision needs to be related to the contents that are included in the message. This is all occurring in this social context of something we call milling, which is message confirmation. So at the same time that an individual is going through these message perception activities of understanding, believing, personalizing, and deciding, they're also looking around to confirm that the message is real, that it's accurate, and that the environment around them is truly demonstrating or showing signs of this potential risk, which can be very difficult if you can't see the threat, feel the threat, smell the threat, or identify the threat, which means that that message delivers an incredible amount of information for people to recognize that they are at risk. We're also very interested in these items that are on the right-hand side of the screen, which are additional outcomes of measuring people's ability to take action, which includes something called self-efficacy and response efficacy. Self-efficacy is believing that I personally have the ability to take the response that's recommended. And response efficacy is believing that the recommendations provided to me are things that will keep me safe. And we also want to know whether or not the messages that are designed and delivered to people increase or decrease organizational reputation and trust. We know that when people receive these messages, it's in a sea of many, many other alerts arriving on their devices in every day, and recognizing that that organization is trustworthy and should be followed is a key part of measuring whether or not people might take a response to the message. So there are specific contents that we know motivate action, And these have been identified as part of the warning response model. And we've also written about it in the article that's listed below. With every study that I show you today supporting the recommendations, I will provide to you the information about where you can go to get that study. And I'll also make sure that EENA provides that to you at a later time. The first thing that's important to motivate action is the source of the message, using a local, familiar, and trusted name. And especially as people are receiving so many messages every day on their wireless devices, their cell phones, identifying what the source is of the message is really important so that people know who the message is from. The second is the hazard and the consequences. Identifying the name of the hazard and describing the consequences to the populations helps people to understand what's happening and also determine whether or not they can take action in response to that event. The location and the population needs to be included as a content using familiar landmarks and known physical boundaries. Protective action needs to be included, which is essentially instructions for what people can do to remain healthy and safe, and an element of time when the threat is occurring, when people should initiate action, when the message might be updated. We also know that message style is very important as we're writing a message, not in using jargon. And for us, jargon is language that's very technical, something that you would need to have an education campaign to train people about that content ahead of time. And that would be considered jargon. Not using acronyms or abbreviations such as IPAWS or FEMA or WEA, which are things that I've already mentioned in this presentation. And then using very familiar words that are easy to translate into other languages. In terms of visual attention, when we write messages, it will be important to use all caps very selectively in order to draw attention to differences in the sentence. Many times in the US, we see messages that are written in all caps entirely, and it's very difficult visually to identify what's important in the message, and it's also just difficult to read. All caps can also increase a sense of urgency, such as by using the word now in all caps in the middle of a sentence. So when we developed the tools for the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the IPAWS program, the first thing we did was evaluate existing messages that had been issued through the IPAWS system by drawing from the framework that I just presented to you. And we conducted content analyses that applied the warning response model to emergency alerts. I wanted to just point to you that we've done that for multiple kinds of events in the United States, and then also call attention to some of your colleagues in France and in Brazil. In the US, we have applied this to wildfires. We applied it to a decade of wireless emergency alerts. We've applied it to missing persons alerts, and also looked at what we call post-alert messages, which is essentially something like an all clear message letting people know the event has ended. And then in France, Johnny Duvenet and his colleagues have studied French alert, and in Brazil, De Fonseca has looked at Brazil's experience with disaster communication messages. Once these content analyses were conducted, we were able to start to build what we called the warning lexicon. The publication that I refer you to for the warning lexicon is freely available, and I will make sure that you have a link to access that in one of my future slides. There it is. It's freely available at bit.ly/warning lexicon. And you will want to download the supplemental material that is included. It's been downloaded more than 13,000 times across the US and internationally. And this is the document that provides all of the contents that are necessary for writing messages for 48 different hazards. I'm going to show you the steps that we went through to develop the warning lexicon in order to show you why we can trust that this is a good strategy for writing messages. It was presented only in English, and we only looked at text. And in the future, I would love to work with international collaborators in order to develop additional languages, and also potentially to use visuals as part of this strategy for communicating effectively. When we developed the warning lexicon, the first thing we did was to collect data from jurisdictions across the US and identify the types of hazards that we're issuing messages for and the protective actions that were included in those messages. We took those messages apart, identified that there were approximately 48 hazard types, and a number of protective action statements that go along with those hazards. So we developed those statements, and then we went to hazard subject matter experts to ask them to confirm and to improve upon the statements that were identified in those initial messages. Our subject matter experts included people from meteorology, atmospheric science, geosciences, health, emergency management, law enforcement, and they worked with us to identify what we call impact and action statements, which is essentially describing the threat and what it can do to people, and then also identifying the statements that would be useful for instructing people on how to protect themselves. And then we worked with communication subject matter experts to determine that the language that we were using to describe the impacts and the action statements were as jargon-free as possible and easily translatable. This led to our final warning lexicon. And when we wrote the lexicon, we also included supplemental materials. This is an example of supplemental material for hurricane, tropical cyclone, and tropical storm, which is a very similar hazard, but named differently in different parts of the world. And you see at the top, the name of the hazard. Below it is the hazard impacts or the consequences of the hazard. And below that is contents for pre-event and during or post-event, in particular for protective action guidance. So as a user of this information, you would have access to the supplemental material that provides the impact statement followed by those protective action statements. And the warning lexicon also walks you through steps to design a message that was based upon additional research on how messages should be structured and the order of contents. So the first step would be to include the name of the sending source, which would be entered by the sending organization. The second step would be to draw from the warning lexicon to identify the name of the hazard or the threat and describing the consequences and what the hazard is doing. The third step is to describe where the threat is occurring, which is entered by the message writer, describing the location using geographical boundaries and known landmarks. The fourth is to describe when the threat is occurring, the time of day, at the onset of the hazard or the action. And the fifth step is to pull information from that supplemental material to describe what people should do to protect themselves. The last thing we recommend is to include a website or a phone number showing people where they can go to get additional information. After we developed the warning lexicon, we tested it. We've done several studies. The first one I want to point to is the study that was published in 2025, which we called "The Complete Message is the Best Message: The Case for Standardizing Wireless Emergency Alerts." We tested the warning lexicon in New York City as an experiment. We assigned each participant one of 5 different kinds of hazards and then one of 3 different kinds of messages. And then we looked at differences between the messages on those warning response model outcomes that I described earlier, assessing whether or not people better understood, personalized, believed, and could make a decision in response to the 3 different kinds of messages that they were exposed to. These were the 5 hazards we tested in New York City: a blackout, which is when like a power outage; infectious disease, reflecting COVID; a police incident, such as an active shooter; heavy snow, a meteorological event, and then chemical release, which would be an unknown hazardous materials event. This is an example of the three kinds of messages we tested. The one on the far left we called an incomplete standard of practice message, and this came from an organization that was a message that was issued as part of our initial review of messages in the content analyses we completed before developing the warning lexicon. You see that in this case, the message does not include the message source. It does include the hazard name, a police incident. It does include recommendations to remain inside and lock doors. It does include telling people to call if they see something suspicious, but it does not include anything about the location or the time of the event. The middle message, which is a complete standard of practice message, was a message that included all of those contents, all 5 contents that are recommended. And it also came from one of our alert and warning messages that we initially evaluated as our content analysis. Here you see the source comes first, followed by the location of the event, and the hazard is named as a police incident. An explanation that the closure of the roads will remain in effect until further notice. Further notice is the time of the event, and the instructions are to avoid the area. When we follow the steps that are included in the warning lexicon, we find the message on the far right. Here, the source is first, followed by the name of the event and the location, telling people what can occur due to this law enforcement incident, which is road closures and traffic delays. The instructions include to avoid the area around West 51st Street and to check the website for additional information. You also notice that we use selectively all caps for the words avoid and check, which draws people's eyes visually to that message content. When we tested the 3 different kinds of messages with 5 different kinds of hazards, what we found was the following. The way that you will read this is that the darker the blue represents a better outcome in comparison with that first message, the incomplete standard of practice message. So we see that for message understanding, the best message is the lexicon message, but the complete standard of practice message is still better than the incomplete standard of practice. For believing the message, the lexicon message outperforms the complete and the incomplete standard of practice. There were no differences for personalizing the message and making a decision about what action to take. However, if we look down at self-efficacy, believing that a person can take the action, the lexicon message and the complete standard of practice message outperforms the incomplete standard of practice message. So what's important to recognize here is that a message that includes all 5 contents by far outperforms the standard of practice of not including all of the contents in the message. So we took the messages that we tested in New York City and replicated that in 5 other parts of the United States, and we found the same results and outcomes, demonstrating that the lexicon is a better approach. We've also asked people for their preference about which message they prefer, and by far they prefer the lexicon-built message. So from our experiment results, we see that understanding the systematically designed messages improves understanding, that they also improve belief in the message, and that self-efficacy is increased when they receive a lexicon-built message. The benefit of using the lexicon is it also makes it a lot easier to write messages because all of the contents are provided for you. And here's an example of what we did when we replicated that study. We went to Detroit, Michigan, Phoenix, Arizona, San Diego, California, St. Louis, Missouri, and Tampa, Florida. The hazards are listed there, very similar to the ones we tested in New York City. And we found that the same standardization of message design outperforms the standard of practice messages in all of our study areas. So this is what a complete message looks like for an imminent threat. It is the source followed by the hazard type occurring in a location at time. Things that are in brackets would be filled in by the message writer. This is followed by a hazard impact statement and protective action guidance, and then a statement about for more information, visit, and inserting a URL or a web link. After we completed the warning lexicon, we added more contents. We have a study that is currently under review for post-alert messages, which includes all clear messaging for all of the hazards that are in the warning lexicon, helping organizations to write messages essentially indicating that the threat is over and that people are safe. When we write a post-alert message, we are essentially closing the communication loop. When a warning is issued, it helps to reduce surprise and help people to make decisions. When the warning is ended, it closes that communication loop and reduces uncertainty. And it demonstrates to people that they can end their active coping activities, such as sheltering in place, going indoors and remaining there while the threat is occurring, or leaving the area, such as through evacuation. So when we looked at all clear messages that were issued by alerting authorities, similar to when we did the content analyses prior to developing the warning lexicon, we found that most of the messages were focused on the top right, which is hazard resolution, talking about things that are restored and contained. Messages on the far left also was a highly prevalent, where messages were lifted or people were told that messages were expired. But what we find is that what people want to know is whether or not they can conclude behaviors, resuming their prior activities, returning home because the hazard has been resolved and they are safe. So here's some examples of incomplete and complete post-alert messages that we tested in an experimental context. On the left-hand side, you see an example of a message that indicates that the bomb threat message was canceled, that the shelter-in-place orders were lifted. It is focused almost entirely on the message conditions themselves and not on the actions that people can take. On the right-hand side, you see a complete post-alert message indicating that the area is safe and that people can return to the location. And what we find when we conduct experiments with these kinds of messages is that people find that when they receive the complete post-alert message, it reduces their information seeking about what happened and what they should do. It increases their ability to decide what to do next, and it also increases their feelings of self-efficacy that they can take the actions that are recommended. And importantly, we also measured whether or not sending a post-alert message affects people's perceptions of the organization. This is where those measures about organizational trust come in. And we found that people who received a post-alert message had greater feelings that the organization was credible, that they were being transparent about the event and about the recovery of the event. And also it increased the organization's reputation among those who received the message. When we asked people what kind of message they wanted to receive, more than 80% said that they preferred to receive that complete message that told them that the threat was over and that they were safe and they could resume or return to what they were doing prior to the threat beginning. This particular study, it has been published just a few weeks ago in an International Journal of Disaster Risk Reduction called Are We Safe Yet? And that was led by Hugh Walpole. And the lexicon for post-alert messaging is under its second review. And as soon as that supplemental material with all of those templates are available, those will be made available publicly. But this is what a complete post-alert message looks like based upon our studies. It is similar to the imminent threat message, where it begins with the source, followed by the hazard name, location, and time, a statement that it is no longer threatening, and that people can either resume, return, or conclude actions. And then importantly, if there are things that people need to do to return to the area or to remain safe as law enforcement continues their investigative activities, new guidance needs to be included to help people to know what they should do as they are resuming, returning, or concluding actions. I have one more study to show you that we did because this was where we added one more set of contents to the warning lexicon. We also conducted research on missing persons alerts. And again, I show you all of this because it is foundational to the tool that we developed, which I'm going to show you after this study. When we focused on missing persons alerts, we conducted another content analysis to understand how missing persons alerts are written, and we applied the missing and endangered persons message framework. This study was led by Lauren Kane and a graduate student who may be joining the University of Avignon next January. So missing persons alerts, we know that more than 98% of wireless emergency alerts issued for missing and endangered persons miss critical information. On the right-hand side, you see what we call an Amber Alert in the United States, which is for a child who has been abducted and is considered to be at risk, their lives are at risk. And this message on the right is a common standard of practice where it includes the name of the alert, the sender or the location, which here is San Francisco, California, and then LIC / is the license plate, which is included in that message. And then also a very brief description of the vehicle that the person is in. An Amber Alert is jargon to represent that it's a missing child who has been abducted, which would require a person to have public knowledge about what amber means. In most missing persons alerts, what is missing includes who is missing, where to look for them, and what to do if they are found. Missing persons alerts frequently rely on jargon, such as Amber Alert, to communicate the type of missing person and what people should do to assist. We know that in order for jargon and missing persons alerts to be successful will require public knowledge. And so our recommendation from the content analysis as well as experiments that we've conducted, also under review, is to use plain language and to write complete messages. And this is what a complete missing person message would look like. It's very similar to an imminent threat and a post-alert message as you look at the structure. Everything in brackets would be replaced by the message writer. It begins with the source, the name of the type of alert, in this case, a missing child, a missing adult, or a missing older adult, followed by a description of the person, their age, race, gender, hair color, their name in some cases, descriptions of their clothing, and other vulnerabilities such as having some sort of a mental incapability, having autism or other diagnosed physical issues. When the person was last seen, including the location and the time, and then telling people what to do, such as going to that URL for more information and telling them, if seen, to call a phone number such as in the United States 911, which would go to our emergency services. After we completed all of those studies to demonstrate the effectiveness of the work that we were promoting, we built software. And the software that was created through the University at Albany with funding from the FEMA IPAWS program is called the Message Design Dashboard. It's freely available at the following URL, atp.aws.fema.gov. This is something that you will need to do multi-factor authentication to access that URL. But once you've accessed it, you'll have free ability to utilize the software. It is in English. It includes all 48 hazards in the warning lexicon, and it has recently included the templates for post-alert messages and the template for missing person alerts. And I'm going to show you a brief video showing you what the dashboard looks like. And I'll give you a little walkthrough. This is the landing page for the message design dashboard. When you begin to create a message, you click on Create Message. In the US, wireless emergency alerts are limited to 360 characters and 90 characters. We always recommend starting with the longer message. The writer is then introduced to enter the name of the sending organization and then selecting from the drop-down menu the kind of hazard that they're sending a message for, which provides for them the impact statement. Similar to the warning lexicon, you see brackets that are filled in by the message sender. In this case, they're filling in the location information and selecting one of the variations of words that are included for this particular event. This is for a 911 service being down. Then they click on the next step, which sends them to protective actions that are being recommended. They select from the list of protective actions and fill in the bracketed information with the required local information. They change the words that are included in the brackets, selecting from the options that are offered. As this is occurring, the message design dashboard offers additional suggestions, such as reminding you to check that your source information is accurate. And at the end of building your message, it's going to check to make sure that the URL is live. And if you use the message design dashboard prior to building these messages, you can also pre-identify your source information and create URLs and other information so that it's already preloaded. On the right-hand side, you see the message preview as it's being built. It just checked to make sure that all the brackets were filled and that the URL works. And then it moves on to creating a 90-character message. And in this case, they went back to do some editing. All of the contents in the entire message are editable. So you can treat the contents as suggestions, but it gives you the workflow and the framework so that by the time you finish writing your message, it is complete and includes all 5 contents that are recommended for an effective message. Here you see that the 90-character message was being written as the 360-character message was being developed. And in this case, they're going back and replacing the words in this area, the location information, with more precise information, and replacing the word info, which is in brackets, with a phone number. On the bottom of that screen, the preview screen, it tells how many characters are being used, how many characters remained. Demonstrating that there was still a little bit more room for writing a message, and people could add more contents. You see also that it provided selective caps as people were writing the message so that it was written in a structure that's easy to read. And then once the message was finished, they saved the message and could copy that information and paste it into their alerting software. The message design dashboard is not presently connected to any alerting software, but it is highly recommended that people develop templates or use the message design dashboard for template creation, or even to use the software at the time of the event so that they have a complete message when they need to send something for an imminent threat, a post-alert message, or a missing persons message. I wanted to point to a few other tools that are available. The first is, I'll mention EM1, which is an AI tool that is available to emergency managers. I presently am working with them as a subject matter advisor to help them to build out their alert and warning capability as part of their AI suite of tools. They are utilizing all of the research that I just presented to you in this webinar so that we can ensure that messages that are designed using artificial intelligence follows the best guidance and is a reliable source for the messages that are being written currently in English So I suggest if you're interested in thinking about AI use for alerts and warnings, please check out EM1. The second thing is the Warn Room, which is my blog and my consulting services. The Warn Room is at thewarnroom.com. And when you visit this website, you will see at the top a drop down for blog. The blog provides evaluation of wireless emergency alerts that have been issued by organizations in the United States. It utilizes the evidence-based guidance that I've presented to you today to show how messages do or do not conform to the guidance and the research, and then also shows how to change those messages to improve them so that messages are better understood, believed, and personalized, and people can take action based upon the contents included in those messages. So my last few points before we get to some discussion is that these resources that I've shared with you are all freely available. However, we know that implementing them takes time, work, effort, and knowledge. In the last 6 months, the Warn Room has begun to work alongside of my colleague Eddie Bertola at Bertola Advisory Services to work with states and local organizations across the United States to help them to implement the research that was presented here. We know that this is an effective strategy to help to motivate people to take action, that standardizing messages and creating good templates and messages that are designed well at the time of the event, it works and it helps people to take action, but it does take time to implement this, all of these different tools. So next steps for you as alerting authorities, I encourage you to build your templates for messaging that are standardized, consistent, and evidence-based. Please make use of the warning lexicon, the post-alert lexicon, and the missing persons standardized messaging strategies that I've presented here. We have the evidence to demonstrate that these are the effective strategies. I also encourage you to practice writing messages following the framework that was presented here, either using the warning lexicon message structure or turning to the message design dashboard, or even reaching out to me and to my colleagues to help you with designing scenarios and practicing writing messages so that you can do this effectively when minutes matter. Developing a strategy and policy for alerting within local organizations, state organizations, and national organizations, and also collaborating across jurisdictional boundaries, making sure that you have a consistent message from between organizations that are issuing messages to your publics. And also, you can always contact me for assistance. Here is my email address where you can reach me. And you can always also reach back out to Benoit at EENA, and he would be happy to provide you with additional resources that I've shared with him and help you to get in contact with me. So thank you very much. I'll stop sharing and we can have some discussion.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. It's been very interesting. It's a great work you've done, and I think it's always good to work in general with researchers because you're able to bring different disciplines to the service of like just improving emergency alerting, and your background in sociology, and there's other researchers that have other backgrounds can really bring something to making a message efficient. So this is really great. I really enjoyed it. Your presentation is very practical and focused on what to do for emergency managers. So I think there's a lot of takeaways for people today. So we still have a bit of time, and as you say, Jeanette, we have a bit of time for discussion. Thank you, Eddie, also for sharing the link on the chat and also for the additional explanations you provided. So there's a possibility to ask a question, so that you can use Slido, so the link we used a bit earlier. Perhaps if Sanna, who's my colleague behind the INA host one, can show the screen for those who have lost it. Yeah, so just use your phone and scan the QR codes to join Slido and ask your question. So we have for the moment 2 questions. Perhaps more will come. So the first one is, do you offer a web service, like an API for using the message?
No, so the message design dashboard was designed for FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and they have not created an API that connects to any web services or to any alerting authority software. As a standalone product, that is one of the gaps. I would love to see something like the message design dashboard integrated into alerting software, or something like EM1 integrated into alerting software, but it has not happened yet.
Thank you, that's clear. Next question, are you working with any standardization organization so that such work can be standardized and support the global harmonization of emergency services?
So I'm aware that organizations such as the UNDRR is utilizing some of the work that we've been doing over the last several years. In fact, this morning they shared it on LinkedIn. I'm also aware that the World Meteorological Organization is working with Dr. Sally Potter out of New Zealand on helping to integrate this into some of their work. However, I've not yet worked with any global standardization organizations on this effort. I welcome the opportunity to do so. This has become the recommended standard in the United States because of the funding from FEMA IPAWS and also because of the 5 decades of research that we draw from to support these recommendations. So if you have standardization organizations that you recommend, reach out to me or that I reach out to, please share that information. I'd be happy to communicate with them.
I think in general, it's good to disseminate the knowledge and make it known as much as possible. Next question, how is the response on post messages from the public? Are they not overwhelmed or annoyed with all those messages coming in?
That's a really good question. Yes. One of the studies that we have recently finished was on over alerting and people's feelings of warning fatigue. And so we're very aware that people can feel like they've received too many messages. And we have 2 conditions where we highly recommend that people issue that post alert message. The first one is if your message says, we are going to tell you when you can stop doing what you've been doing. If that's in the first message that goes out, you must follow up and tell people that they can end what they've been told to do, because you've essentially said that you're going to, and by not doing so demonstrates that you are not reconnecting with your publics. The second time to issue that post alert message is if the threat is highly dreaded or uncertain, and people would really crave and need information about how that threat has been resolved in order to reduce the feelings of uncertainty and fear that accompanies the initial message that might have been issued. And so those are 2 conditions that we highly suggest that the post alert message go out for. In the United States, when a message is issued for evacuation, it's very difficult to issue that follow-up message using the same channel because people have evacuated from the area that they initially received the message in. However, if they've been told to shelter in place or to go inside and lock a door and barricade themselves, they need to know when it's okay to come out. And so that would be a time when you would issue one of those post alert messages. Of course, there's many channels that messages can be issued through, and working to define policy about when messages would be issued and what channels you would use is a really important activity for each messaging organization as well.
Okay, thank you. That's a very good insight indeed. Yeah, so someone actually also on that very topic actually shared. It's anonymous, so I don't know who said that. Perhaps if you can say in the chat, it can be interesting. So our recommendation in I don't know which country for all clear messages is to provide information on why the danger no longer exists. Do you have evidence on whether this makes a difference?
On whether or not telling people that the danger no longer exists makes a difference. What we have is the results from our experimental research that demonstrated that people needed that information in order to make a decision about what to do, and also to increase their confidence in the organization that's responsible for managing the disaster. It's very difficult to collect data or immediately following an event because it requires some sort of a survey, and going into that community and asking individuals how they felt about that message would have to be done immediately after the message was issued in order to capture those perceptions, behaviors, and feelings about the event, which makes it difficult to do that immediate follow-up research in a real event. Um, uh, but the strategies we've been relying on, social science research, experimental research, has found that it does increase people's ability to take action and the reputation of the organization. And I agree with your recommendation on what to include in those messages. It's very similar to our template.
Okay, and thank you. Michelle was from BBK, so the German Federal Office on Civil Protection, and I know you've done a lot of work on templates in Germany, actually. Then we had a question: do you have any statistics like adoption rate of your proposal? It's more than a proposal, actually, but do you have any information on that?
So we know that when FEMA had us working on the message design dashboard, we conducted trainings across the United States, and we had more than 500 emergency managers and public information officers trained to utilize the software, and also they were trained on effective messaging. We don't know presently, I do not know presently how many people are actively utilizing the message design dashboard for writing messages. However, we are able to see effective messages and ineffective messages by going to something called warn.pbs. Maybe Eddie, you could put that into the chat also so people can go to that. It is a public website that shows messages that are being issued through the Wireless Emergency Alert Service in real time. And you can look at the messages and see how they are structured. Most of the messages are issued by the National Weather Service. Those are all automated in terms of the template, so they will be consistent, and they will never include the location of the threat, and specific guidance that's specific to that location. However, you can see when a message is structured with the 5 hazards, or the 5 contents, and you can identify when someone has been trained and is utilizing the recommended guidance from our research. There are plenty of messages issued that do not follow the guidance. And I believe it's because we just haven't had the opportunity to train yet. Because once you see the evidence that the backing for why to do it in this way, I believe that it gives you enough of a rationale to follow this guidance, that it really does make a difference in comparison with the standard of operating procedures, the standard messages that go out. You can see they're dramatically different in comparison.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, yeah. Um, I also actually it brought me it led me to a question. So you mentioned that you did some tests in like very different parts of the US. Did you actually notice some differences in terms of like expectations or perception by the people depending on the region, the age, the gender, or did you just like identify different patterns maybe?
We did not see very, it was consistent. The outcomes that we were measuring were consistent. And what we find in general when we are conducting research is that the demographics of the population don't make as much of a difference as we might think. So gender and age and race and income are less important than people's prior experience with the hazard and their perception of what the hazard can do to them. And so we don't tailor messages to specific populations. We tailor them to help people to understand the threat, understand that they
Mhm.
are at risk and what they can do to protect themselves. And we don't see differences across the US, demonstrating that what works in New York also works in Texas. And I think that's a really excellent thing.
Yes, that's a good sign, and probably also what works in the US probably works in Europe to some extent. So that also shows that uh, your research has a lot of values in other countries as well. Continuing with questions, one is, are messages automatically translated into other languages for foreign audiences?
We have not worked on that. I don't believe that FEMA is presently working on automatic translation. I don't have a recommendation on what translation tools to utilize. In fact, you began this webinar by suggesting that people use translation in the Zoom
Yes.
link. I have no idea how well that has worked. And if people have questions about things that I've said, please email me because I'll try to explain them again and maybe we can work together with a translator. But that has not occurred yet. When I visited Avignon, there was one colleague who said she wanted to translate the warning lexicon into French, taking into consideration cultural differences, different kinds of hazards and ways of describing the hazards and impacts. I welcome that collaboration and I would love to see that, but presently there is no automatic translation tool available or that I can personally recommend.
Yeah, I think in such emergencies, it's always good to also rely on experts also, at least to validate what the AI does.
Mhm.
Continuing with questions, there was one, is INA tracking the UK national test next week? I believe it's a question more for me than for you. Um, well, we're aware that this is happening. We won't be on site. We can't be in every country for every test, but we'll report in case. Mostly, if something fails, we'll be reporting that. We have a newsletter published every 2 weeks, where we speak more or less each time about public warning, among other things. So feel free to register to it as well. Next question. There's many questions, which is a good sign. Do you plan to set a process of revising and adapting the templates periodically, like yearly?
I think our process right now is identifying new threats. The impact of a hazard and the guidance recommended for that particular hazard, I don't believe that it would change too much. With the exception of for earthquakes, at one point there was the recommendation to get under a desk. At another point, there was a recommendation to stand in a doorway. And then at another point, there was this idea of something called the triangle of life, of getting next to a wall. And those recommendations have changed over time because science has demonstrated the best ways to protect yourself. In non-US countries, the recommendation is to get outside of the building. And so it does need to be adapted for different countries and different kinds of building standards. But we don't intend to change the template language. Um, but I'm open to it. Absolutely, because things do evolve, and as new hazards emerge, there will be the necessity of adding more contents in the future.
Mhm. Absolutely. And then the final question that I see is from Ernestas from Lithuania. Is there practice to link recipient in the message to look for post-alert message or information on other sources, for example, on websites?
That is a really good strategy. I have seen that, and it's a nice way to help people to, first of all, go to a trusted resource. If you provide a website where people can go to get additional information from the authoritative source, they can help themselves by going directly to that site. instead of going to some social media site or searching for an authoritative source on their own, which could lead them to who knows where. Um, it also that website can also be a place where you can provide updates to the hazard and updates to what the organization is doing, as well as telling people that the event is over and that they're safe. So that's an excellent way of managing a threat as things continue to evolve, and also to demonstrate your ability to continually connect and communicate with your population.
Indeed, yeah. That's a good way to conclude that webinar. We're a bit over time actually, but it's been a very interesting discussion. So to go forwards, Jeanette, you included your contact details on your slide. So feel free to contact Jeanette or to contact myself, and then I can also make an introduction to you, Jeanette. My email address is bv@eena.org. And yeah, I'll be happy to follow up and bridge with you, Jeanette. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. It's very interesting, and as I said, it's even though it's US based, it's really applicable here in Europe. There's many studies that you mentioned in your presentation, so I think that's good for people who want to go further. I really encourage as well to look at what was done by the work done by the University of Avignon that you mentioned, Jeanette, and that's actually where I met you last March. They also did quite similar analysis, but also a bit different. Also looking at what is done in France with cell broadcast, for instance, how people perceive the noise of the alerts and things like that. So they really did surveys on the perception of the population of an alert, which is also very interesting, I think, to look at. And in general, in research, there's a lot of great things that are done. So we're really grateful to have you today, Jeanette. So the webinar was recorded. The recording and the slides will be shared on our website very soon, by tomorrow probably. It's on ena.org/webinars, where you can access all our webinar. Also, to go forward, we'll have next year in April 2026, the ENA conference will take place. Probably we'll have one full day dedicated to public warning, or with like one track dedicated to public warning. So we'll have a lot of time to explore very different aspects of public warning. So that will be from the 15th to the 17th of April next year. We hope to see you there, Jeanette. And hopefully we can have great discussions and longer than just an hour, because we can see today that more than an hour is needed for such topic. Yeah, that is what I wanted to say. Thank you everyone for joining. And yeah, stay tuned for more events on public warning and emergency communications in general.
Thank you.
Thank you.